Hilary Hahn, welcome to Beyond Stage Fright. In your international career as a violinist, you've performed across the world with leading orchestras and leading conductors and as a recitalist. Your career started when you were very young, and I wondered what kind of impact it had, having that much success so early on.
Well, I think for me, first off, hello. For me, performing was a very natural development, and performing to larger and larger audiences in more prominent settings was a development of the performing I had started doing. When I first began violin, I was in the Suzuki program, and every week we had a group lesson, which sometimes we would be selected to solo for. And every group lesson, whether we knew the whole repertoire that was being played or not, we would still be on stage with the other kids. So that was a really good preparation, I think, just getting used to being on stage. Also, the first thing I learned how to do was to bow. So that's also a stage thing. And then when I started studying with my Russian teacher when I was 5, I was able to take part in studio recitals and student recitals that happened every week. I didn't perform every week, but every time I had a piece that was close to done, we would schedule a student recital performance. And those performances in that particular setting involved, as an audience, the other students who were going to be performing that day, whoever you wanted to invite, the family of the students, and 3 or 4 teachers or faculty members who were like a jury. They would take notes, and in your next lesson, you then go over what they had said with your teacher. And that teacher, Clara Bergovich, she had the idea that, okay, you just played a concert. What can we do next time that's an improvement? What went well? Sort of just assessing and looking towards the next one so that you realize that there's another chance. And I think also assessing the comments from the jury was part of that. You know, what did they say? What do we think of what they said? How can we apply that? Do we take it in? Do we just leave it? And I remember her saying that it's very nice to get good comments, but let's see what they said that can be improved. So I think that really, helped prepare me as a performer. And then when I went to the Curtis Institute of Music when I was 10, I was younger than a lot of the students there, but I was still fully in the student body, and the student recitals there were 3 times a week, so you could go watch your fellow students perform. It was a very nerve-wracking environment to perform in because it's not particularly scary to perform at school, but somehow in that hall it was a little scary because the hall wasn't very deep, and the hall wasn't very big, and the faculty was in the 2 balconies on either side. They were reserved for faculty, and then students and regular concert goers were in the hall, and you just felt very close to everything. So I think those were some of the most nerve-wracking performances I've ever done just at school. And I think it's something a lot of people experience with them.
Did it feel uncomfortable being so much younger than everybody else?
It was not uncomfortable. At that school, it's a very small school. It's 160 students approximately. And I was there in the 1990s, so from 1990 to 1999. And there were kids of all ages, of all different backgrounds. The majority was university aged, but there were so many differences between all of us that age was another factor in someone's personality, or what they brought to school. And at Curtis, I continued playing in the student recitals sort of with the same pattern that I'd done beforehand. And my teacher, Yasha Brodsky, would also, when I got towards a point where I was finishing with a piece, want to make sure that I had a performance scheduled of it. So from there, then I had some more performances outside the school, and it was really when I was at Curtis that I started performing elsewhere as well. But I would always perform first at Curtis because it was schedulable by me. opportunity to perform something with the pianist I've been working on it with, and to really develop that particular piece before I took it into another environment. So I think that whole sequential thing really helped, and gradually building to bigger and bigger performances made perfect sense. There was never really this huge leap into this is the outside world. It was more just I would get a release form from my classes, leave school for a week, come back, catch up on my homework, get back into school life, and work on more pieces, and then work towards another performance, and work my string quartet, and it was just kind of all part of the same sequence of life.
What a fantastic amount of performing experience.
It is really good to have those opportunities, and I think anyone who has those opportunities as a student should probably take advantage of them, because there's something that you experience differently as a performer with music that you think you already know, that you can't necessarily experience in a practice room. And I always feel like I don't really know something until I've performed it. It just reveals other sides of itself to me when I'm on stage. And that's why the first performance is always somewhat scary, because I don't know what it is I'm about to perform, and I could have vastly misjudged it. I get on stage and feel like I've never played this piece before in my life, yet there I am on stage playing it, and there are people listening and watching. So I think that's part of the excitement of working on a new piece, and it's part of the development of integrating a new piece into your life. And as you go on and you perform it more, you get new ideas about it every time you perform. It's not like you perform it the first time and it's always the same after that, but you can build on what you learned that first time. And if you take a break from it and come back to it, you have a combination of these other pieces that you've learned that are influencing the older piece, but you also have the newness of returning to that older piece, but you still somehow have the muscle memory of having played it.
I would imagine that every piece has a different character in every venue that you play in, and that all just feeds into the melting pot of experience.
Absolutely. Quite literally, the venue changes the piece because you hear different things in the piece, because the acoustics highlight different things in the piece. Especially working with colleagues, you hear different aspects of the music being brought out by whatever instrument is highlighted by that hall. Sometimes on a stage with an orchestra, you can hear each other really well, and other times you can't. So that experience, either way, gives you something new to work with.
Did you have any routines of preparing for performances that started off when you were younger?
I did have a routine. I don't remember where it originated. My father had worked as an editor for a sports medicine magazine when I was young, and I think he was very familiar with the idea of, and he'd also played some sports in college and university, and so I think there was an awareness in my environment of this whole idea of prepping for something, and then in that moment having that be the culmination. And there was also the idea of physical aspect to performance. I was always told that it's a positive thing to perform and feel those performance nerves, and not that I was nervous. I find the more you tell yourself you're nervous, the more that becomes a bad thing. And if you realize that you have actually this great tool to work with in this heightened state that you get in with extra adrenaline, when you can think of it that way, then I think it's kind of exciting to get into that state. And it's a big adventure. It's weird. Your body is doing things you don't normally experience, but when you do it a lot, you get really familiar with it. And because your body has to send itself these signals, I think a bit of a routine is helpful. Sometimes I think if you try too hard to stick to a routine, you can stress yourself out about that. Because, when you're in a stressed out state, you're going to pick something to be stressed out about. It's usually not the thing that you're worried about. It's usually something else that you're picking on. And so you don't want the routine to become that thing that you're picking on, because then that'll just throw you off and you'll be like, oh, I didn't stick to the routine, I won't perform well. But little things to give yourself a cue and to enable yourself to physically be at your best are helpful. So for me, I do well when I take a nap before a performance. When I was younger, I used to take a longer nap than I do now. Now, if I can just sometime before I leave for the hall, lie down for even just 15 minutes and get into that sort of in between awake and sleep state, I wake up and I feel much fresher. And I seem to be able to break whatever concerns I had beforehand about whatever else is going on. I seem to be able to break them off at that point. When I get out of my nap phase, I then am like, okay, it's concert time. And I also used to eat a certain thing before I performed. Like 2 hours before I performed, I would have, I don't know, like lentil soup and a fruit salad or something like that. Or at one point it was takeout Chinese, but only like steamed vegetables and rice. Just something not too heavy, but that would maybe last me through the performance. And now being on the road, it's so hard to be specific about what's available to me that I'd be running around all day trying to find it, and that's not easy. So now I just try to eat. I actually eat a larger later lunch. This is something that I've developed since I started performing really routinely, and since I've been on the road for a while. Usually I have a rehearsal in the morning, and then around noon or 12:30 the rehearsal ends, and then I get something for lunch, and I kind of chill out while I'm eating lunch. I might watch a whodunit crime drama or something like that I don't really have to focus on, but that is something completely different from whatever I had on my mind that morning. I might listen to a little bit of a recording of the rehearsal, especially if it's a duo rehearsal. It's possible to record it. And sometimes I don't, though, because sometimes I can get in my own head about it too much and be thrown off. But if I want to check something about the rehearsal, make sure that I know what I want to do for the evening, then it's sometimes a good time to do that. So I just try to kind of shut off, get away from emails a bit. Don't get too preoccupied with anything new. And then when I wake up from my nap, I pack some snacks, go to the hall, get ready. And I think as a woman, getting ready for a concert is much more involved than it is for men, because I'm amazed. I'll be talking to a colleague and he'll just run and put on his suit and that's it. And he's done. And I'm steaming out my dress and trying to get my hair to cooperate, doing makeup, and time really flies. But it's nice to have that focused time in front of the mirror with the dressing room lights. It's just a very specific setting. And I might listen to a podcast in that time, but I'm not very good at talking at that time. Somehow words just don't come to my head. And sometimes people come and knock on the dressing room door and say hello, and it's usually someone related to the concert, like the person who brought me there, or someone from management or the record company or whatever. Usually official people show up at your door about 15 minutes before the concert. And I just feel so weird at that moment because I'm unable to speak. And I just wind up looking at this person and like staring and nodding and feeling so unable to express myself. And I'm actually happy to be there, but it's hard for me to say it because my brain is just automatically through that whole preparation process going towards music, concert. And I think the piece is also playing in my head the whole time without me even trying.
Yeah.
So I just really can't get a whole lot done.
Do you find that the whole day of the concert is geared up to the focal point of the performance?
Absolutely, in some way or another. I think the body knows, even if the mind isn't entirely there. I don't know why that is. It may just be me. But when I wake up in the morning on a concert day, sometimes I'm a little restless. Not all the time. Sometimes I'm just trying to get to the airport, or I have to have to accomplish things before I get to the hall, and then I get to the hall and I realize, oh yeah, it's a concert day. Or I feel like, I'd really like to have just an evening where I go have dinner or I rest or something like that, like a quiet evening, no lights, just dark, nighttime. Because with the adrenaline, the way it is physically, normally we do have, adrenaline is a normal hormone that affects us in the course of every day. And normally it's supposed to spike around mid-afternoon and then kind of calm down and be at its lowest while we're sleeping. But if you peak it in such an intense way right before bedtime or right around when the body would normally be winding down, then it's gradually winding down as you're sleeping and it hits its lowest when you wake up. And then you're constantly going up and way down and way up and way down when you're on a touring schedule. And it's just not in line with the actual schedule your body is on as far as sleep and wake. So it's just this thing that you sometimes feel like I'm out of whack. I need to get back in line, and playing a concert is going to put me more out of whack right now. But there's just that little voice that's just always talking at you. And I know by now that that's just me feeling restless, like something, I'm gearing up for something, and sometimes my body interprets that as maybe I should not be doing this. Because the signals of adrenaline can be danger signals, they can be panic signals, they can be excitement signals, or they can really make an experience even greater in a positive way. So depending on the day and where your mind is on that day, it'll interpret those as meaning different things automatically. But every time I step on stage, I kind of lose all those doubts, and I am just really happy to be there. I love that energy of everyone in the whole space being at this event together. And I don't think I particularly love the fact that focus is on me. I don't dislike it. It's just, I do thrive in the performance situation, but I think it's from just the general focus of everyone in the same room going through the same thing in a concentrated way. And everyone is having their own experience. And it's just a really inimitable situation. It's great to be in the middle of it. And I think because of the adrenaline I experience performing differently than I experience going to a concert. So when I'm performing, I'm also, like, I'm in that room with everyone, but I'm much more aware and alert to every little tiny thing that's going on. And when I'm in the audience, I probably haven't prepped in any way to go to the concert. I probably just run in from somewhere else, and I probably am not in the same zone as everyone else might be, or attuned to everyone else. I find one thing that happens when I'm watching a performance or listening to a performance is my mind wanders immensely. I have so many ideas when I'm attending a performance, and I almost have to pull out a notepad and write them down, like creative ideas, like things I want to do, the projects I want to do. And then the next day I look at it and I'm like, what was I thinking? Kind of like when people like get in a certain creative mindset because they're under the influence of something, and then the next day they look at it and they're like, that's a weird idea. I kind of look at it the next day and I'm like, that's a really good idea, but what was I like? I can't make all that happen. Not even in 10 years. And when I'm on stage, it's very much about the thing that's actually happening, and I don't spiral out into other things. So I think it's a creative stimulus, regardless of where you are in the hall, but it's the state of mind and the state of body that make it entirely different things. And for some people, they get that really focused experience going to a concert because of where their body and mind are in that moment. And I've had amazing experiences attending a concert where I was just completely in it and swept up, and there was nothing else that was going on. So I think as a performer, it's our job to try to reach out to the audience, but at the same time, not force ourselves on the audience, because everyone is going to have a different experience. And if you try to get in the way of what one person's interpretation of a concert is, then you might be doing that person a disservice, because you don't know why they're there, what they're getting out of it. And you might be limiting their potential as an audience member for their own experience that day. And so it's a difficult balance. I think a lot of it has to do with program planning. If you can plan for example, with a recital, that's the only program I actually plan start to finish. So if you can organize a recital such that everyone is somehow brought into the same space in the first piece, then you can depart from there, and it's a shared experience the whole way.
When I've seen you perform, I've been amazed at your ability to focus. You've been so wrapped up and absorbed in the music that I wondered whether, if a fire alarm went off in the middle of a performance, you would actually notice. How do you get that kind of focus?
It's such a funny thing. The first time I performed for a larger audience out of the school context, I think I was 6. It was at the church that we went to, and it was a special dinner, and I was playing a couple short pieces with the organist on piano. And I actually had a fever. I had the flu, but I wanted to perform anyway. I didn't see the point. I was like, well, I have a fever, but I have a concert. So I want to do this. This seems interesting. And at that point, I'd already performed in a student recital, and I kind of knew that I enjoyed performing. So I was excited to get to perform in this big context. It was a really big deal for me. So I walked on stage, and for some reason, I could not lift my eyes from my bow. I was just glued. Like, there was just no way I could look anywhere else. And it was magnetic. I don't know why that was, but that was just what happened in that context. And I walked off stage, and I didn't have a fever anymore. So I think there's something for me about performing that's really positive. And even when I'm feeling really sick, I still try, unless I can't stand up, or unless it's dangerous for me to perform for whatever reason. I try to still do the concert, because something about it kicks my body into recovery mode. And I don't know if it's the adrenaline or what, but I'm likely to be sick for longer if I don't do the concert. So I just go ahead and I do it, and I feel better in the moment when I'm performing, and I feel better afterwards. The next day I feel better. So it was a weird lesson to learn that early on.
But so many people who play through illness would crash afterwards.
There's that sometimes. Actually, after I perform, I like to greet the audience, because it's a way for me to kind of release that excitement that's built up and connect with what just happened, get to meet the audience. But after that, I'm really tired. I'm just yawning all over the place, and I have to go chill for a while. I can't necessarily go to sleep immediately, but I just go do something unrelated and lying down on my own. Sometimes I hang out with people, especially if it's the end of the tour and I'm working with friends and I won't see them for a while, or if it's a presenter that I've had a really long relationship with and they've invited me to dinner. And I try to do those things as much as I can, but I do wind up yawning over dinner, so it's not so polite. But that focus has always been there, and I think something about performing has always been very positive for me. I think I've always been encouraged to think of it as a positive experience and not as a scary culmination test. There's always something you can improve from a concert, so seeing it as a sequence, I think, from early on really helped. And also, my first teacher, Clara Berkovich, my Russian teacher, she told me that performing is like giving a gift to the audience, like throwing a party. So you invite the audience and you give them the gift of the music, and they thank you with their applause. And I think that's just a really nice image for a kid. but it's also a nice image for a grown-up. That was how I first approached the whole idea of performing. And I think that focus thing that happens to me on stage, it's just instinctive. It's just where my head goes when I'm in that state. And it's almost, I think, like a hyper meditative state. I'm having all this stuff that's happening inside me. Like I am having fun and I'm feeling it and I'm going through the emotions. I'm really focused and I'm really aware of everything that's around me on the stage. I know when someone in the front row is reading their program and I'm like, oh, I lost him. I got to get him back. And I see when people are like kicking their legs in the audience. I'm like, they're either really liking it or they're really bored. Let me see if I can do something to influence that. And it's, if people are sounding restless, then I try to work with that and bring them back in. If someone drops a program, it's a good sign, because every time I've ever dropped a program, it's because I forgot what was in my hands. So I'm like, yes, I got a program drop. But at the same time, I'm really focused on what I'm doing. So it's like being present on many levels. And I actually like hearing the audience. I like hearing those noises and that feedback, because otherwise it's a vacuum. They remind me that people are out there, that they're individuals. Like, if they have a cold or something, I empathize with the person who's like choking, trying to suppress it, or who's coughing really hard, because I've been there. I was that person in the second row of a concert who knew the people on stage, who had no idea that they had any kind of cough, and spent the entire first movement of the Beethoven Concerto with tears running down my face, my nose running, basically choking the entire time and making all sorts of suppressed noises and probably disturbing everyone. I have great empathy for everyone who is in the hall and being a person. And so, I kind of like, I know some people hate it, but I kind of like hearing noises, because then I just can connect with the fact that there are people out there. When you're on stage, you can't see the audience very well. It's so dark. So those cues are really helpful. When I was little, for whatever reason, my dad decided to try to get me in the habit of being distracted so that I could increase my focus. And so my dad is very involved in these stories, because my mom was a career woman and she was in finance. She would work a lot and my dad stayed home. And so he took me to my lessons. He kind of got me supported in those ways, and my mom was supportive in other ways. And so it was a really good home balance, I think, with both parents. But I remember when I was practicing when I was little, my dad would just run circles around me, making funny faces, leaping, carrying balloons, basically being a clown and trying to distract me. And I would have to try to play through the piece focused and not make a memory slip, or not break into laughter and stop playing. And it wasn't like a torture thing at all. It was like a game. Like how long, it was like a staring contest. How long can I keep this up? But I think being in that meditative state is very inward and very outward at the same time, but mostly mentally so for me. And I'm really, really in the moment. And I still have that tendency to look at the bow when I'm playing. And I think it gives me greater control over my playing when I'm on stage, because the bow can influence how you're projecting, how you're bringing the music across in a very good or very bad way. So I think it's good that I can keep in touch with that. But now I love watching the people around me. I love looking up at the orchestra, keeping an eye on the pianist. But I was always told to not let my eyes drift into the audience while I was playing, because as a student, it just looks like you're completely distracted when you do that.
If you've had that kind of training and focus, I imagine that the little noises like rattlings of programs and coughs coming from the audience just wouldn't bother you at all.
They're nothing compared to being 3 feet away from someone leaping around, pulling faces and making noises and getting up in your face with a silly expression or whatever while you're trying to play. I mean, those things I can compartmentalize from the audience. Like they're little distractions compared to all of that. And for me, there's really nothing awful that's going to happen on stage. I mean, the way I look at it is the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have to stop because I forgot where I was in the music. And at that moment, it's your job as a performer to put the audience at ease, not to scare people. And in doing so, I think you can also put yourself at ease. So I have wound up having to stop and start over. Not frequently, but it happens. When you perform a certain amount, it's just going to happen. And whenever I make a super obvious mistake or do something that might make people really worry for me, like when I stop playing, when I'm not supposed to stop playing, if everything else has stopped as well and I can't find my way back, I just say, whoops, live performance, something like that, and laugh, and the audience is relieved, they laugh, and then I start again. And I find that actually, instead of that being an embarrassing moment for the audience, it makes it human, and they relate to what you're doing, and they're pulling for you as you continue your performance. So that's the worst case scenario. It's not so bad. It's not like, I always compare it to like jumping out of an airplane with a parachute. You know, if the parachute doesn't open, that's a problem. If you lose your place in the music, you're going to live. So you can try again next time. You can practice that part differently, train your muscle memory differently, whatever. You're going to be fine. And, you know, it all sounds well and good, but when you're actually in that state of mind, it's not logical and you can't talk yourself through it. And I think the thing that for me has been most helpful has been just noticing. Just notice that little voice in your head and don't engage with it. Let it keep talking. Eventually it becomes background noise. Sometimes it's louder than others, but, you know, breathe. Be sure to breathe. Whenever I have a scary passage coming up, I'll take some planned deep breaths before I get there, because otherwise I hold my breath and my muscles start to do weird things and the muscle memory can't kick in. But I find if I go as I'm playing, not in an obvious way, but making myself expand my breath and exhale, it helps. And then just little things like that I find allow the body to take over when the body needs to take over, and let the brain kind of do its thing. But if you can just notice what's happening, and then later you can think about it and you can try something else next time when you notice it, I think that's a really good way to not panic in the moment, but to acknowledge that it's happening. I think it's a very helpful process.
What are the differences for you in making a recording compared to the live performance?
Recording is very different. There are several differences. One is that in a performance, you play one time through, and there's an audience there, and everyone is paying attention to every note, whether it's the people on stage or the people in the audience. Maybe they aren't actually paying attention, but you think that they are. So you really, you've got one shot. And I think that means that you take all of your energy and you put it into that one time. And then afterwards, you couldn't do that all day. Like you just couldn't sustain that. And afterwards, then, like this has an arc and this is when it's going to end. And you can kind of chart your progress as you go through the piece. You can pace yourself accordingly, and you can max out your energy. Your arms can be exhausted at the end, and it's okay. In a recording, you don't have that automatic burst of energy for knowing that the audience is there and sensing that they're expecting every note. And you often start in the morning and you go all day. The first hour or so is often sound checking. There are frequently sort of enforced break times throughout the recording process, especially if you're recording in the United States. The union is more strict about when you have to take your breaks. So you may just be in the middle of a great take, but then you have to stop for 20 minutes. And then you have to start up again, and people have had a snack, they've had a coffee, and it's just a different vibe, so you have to find each other again. And knowing that you're going to be going all day and not knowing exactly when the absolute version is that you're going to be recording, like everyone on stage doesn't know at that time that this is the one. I've had circumstances where there's a great take all the way through for me, but then there's something wrong. So then that's not a take I can use. And it's frustrating when you hear that happening. You then have to save yourself sort of for another take. And I like to do as many long takes as possible for use in the recording. I don't like to break it up, but then there are things that you have to adjust for later. So if you let all that start to calculate in your head, it's very easy to not be in the moment. And I think a great recording situation is where everyone puts themselves into the music differently each time you play it, so that each time is fresh, each time is new. You're not calculating, oh, well, like if I do it this way, then I can't cut in at this point, and it's not going to match what I did before. You're just going for it each time. And that's what I try to do. And with a great set of colleagues that approaches it the same way, it can actually be really fun because you go very much in depth into the piece. You have multiple performances in the same day, and you get to know each other better as musicians. You get to do a lot of experimenting with the music. In a way, it's liberating because you can try something that won't work, and that's okay. If you're in a performance, you kind of want to make sure you make it to the end of the performance. So you might be a little bit careful sometimes about the things that you try, but at the same time, there's this abandon you get from the adrenaline that just sometimes makes you say, oh, what the heck, I'll just do it anyway. And it's a matter of finding the things that inspire you to get to that point of freedom when you're recording.
How do you manage to keep your stamina for a whole day of recording? It's so completely different from gearing up to one performance in the evening.
It's true, and the thing is, you can't sound like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You can't sound like you're pacing yourself. You have to sound entirely committed each time, and it's hard to fake that, so you have to commit each time. And the fewer times you have to redo something in a way, the better, because as your body realizes that, oh, I'm going to have to commit to this so many more times, I'm getting tired, sometimes that can subconsciously play a role. But for me, I always like to imagine that I'm playing through the mic to someone in that moment who's driving a car, listening on their speakers, or that someone is in their home listening studio, like they have an audio set up and they're in their chair and they've got the score open in front of them and they've got a drink and they're like in it with me in that particular space, so that even if they're not in the room, they're there really close to me through the microphone. And that's another difference with recording. People hear from a different vantage point, not vantage, that's visual, a different audio perspective, because the microphone is so close, it picks up everything. When I play for a hall, I play differently than I do for a microphone, because sometimes when I play my projection way into the mic, it sounds like I'm shouting all the time. And there's a whole other range of nuance that you get to do in a recording because it will be heard. And to try to dig into that is actually really exciting. And that's another way you get a different entry point into the music. You also don't worry so much about balances because the mics kind of take care of that. So you can try different proportions with the orchestra, for example, that you wouldn't have the opportunity to try on stage or in a rehearsal. So it's actually a good set of opportunities to try different things. And imagining the audience like that close is also more personal and a more direct connection.
What does it feel like for you when it's going really well on stage?
That's a great question. I haven't had to describe it very much. Let me see what I can compare it to. The thing is, I can't really compare it to anything because I haven't had the experience with anything that's exactly like what I feel when I'm performing. But I think I feel, I don't know if this goes back to student days when, in lessons you're always being stopped by your teacher, and when you're practicing at home, especially when you're starting out, you have someone practicing with you and they're stopping you. Then you get to perform and no one's stopping you. It's like, I get to keep going. Um, I don't know if it comes from that initial experience, but I do feel like the flow of the music is much more intense in a performance, that you can follow one thing through to another thing, to another thing, to another thing. And it's this momentum that carries you. At the same time, you can be very creative within it, and it's not a passive experience. Like the inner feeling, I think, is just one of being exactly where I belong. It's not that I feel in my head that I belong on stage. I actually like being kind of in the background most of the time in my normal life. I like observing and I like just being somewhere and being quiet. But when I get on stage, it's this whole other thing, and I feel like I'm meant to be there because it feels so right. And it's almost like everything is aligning perfectly. I think it's what they call in sports the flow or being in the zone. It's not that everything is going great all the time. It's just that I seem to know what to do when I'm on stage, and I seem to be able to process all the things that are happening in a positive way. And I feel like it's a positive contribution. So I'm part of something good. I mean, I'm actually really happy that my career is not one that I have to doubt as far as the contribution that I can make, or the negative impact that I can have on the world. I feel like going to a concert is voluntary. I'm not forcing it on anyone. So the people who want to go are there and they want to enjoy it. And I don't feel like I'm doing harm by playing music. And I think a lot of careers, there is a bit of that sometimes, especially when you're trying to do something that could make a big difference in the world. You could also make a negative difference. And with music, I think it's pretty much positive. I mean, the worst thing is that someone won't enjoy the concert, but I do my best to not make that happen. And I can't make everyone happy, but I try. Um, so it's just this feeling of like doing something good and belonging and contributing and being part of something greater because of all the people that are there in the hall, and that excitement that I get, the concert nerves, performance nerves, it makes all of that feel much more intense. So it's even a more heightened sense of all of that.
Hilary Hahn, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.